My style during the summer is almost non-existent. I wear shorts and t-shirts and just try to survive the heat that seems to be trying to suffocate me. But once my kids start school and it starts to cool down, I remember that I feel better when I feel more put together. So this week's episode is all about different podcasts that can help you find your style and wear clothes that make you happy. Hi, I'm Andy Smiley, the Friendly Podcast Guide. I help moms find podcasts for themselves and their kids that are a good fit. Before I dive into these recommendations, I'm going to tell you about my podcast consultations. I've been able to talk to some amazing podcasters about their shows while doing interviews for the Friendly Podcast Guide. And along the way, I've learned so many tips and tricks on how to start a podcast from the hosts I've interviewed and from personal experience. I've talked to those hosts about what made their launch successful and what made it more difficult. And I for sure know what I would do differently if I could go back and launch my show again. And now I want to share my knowledge with you. I'm offering podcast consults, and I have a couple of spots open in the next month. If you need help nailing down your podcast idea, figuring out your niche, or you have any other podcast questions, I would love to work with you to make your show's launch the best it can be. If you're interested in working with me, fill out the intake form in the show notes. I can't wait to make a podcast plan that is tailored to you and your podcast and will make your launch as smooth and successful as possible. Okay. Now for these style podcast recommendations. The first style podcast on my list for today is one that I've been listening to for a while, and I've actually had the privilege of interviewing the host, Jen, on my show. I'll link to that episode in the show notes. It was a delightful conversation, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Jen has been a stylist for a long time, and it shows from how she explains things in an easy-to-understand way to her understanding how most women usually react to what she's saying. If you're looking for a place to start in finding your style and dressing in a way that makes you happy, this is the podcast for you. One Everyday Style School episode that I think you'll like is called Style Lies We Tell Ourselves. This episode talks about 5 lies we tell ourselves about style and how they're holding us back. It's a great place to start. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. This next podcast about style is called the Getting Dressed Podcast. Hosts Leah Nalepa and Anthony Bolognese are fashion business owners based in Washington, D.C., and their conversations are fun and easy to listen to. So if you're looking to get some advice on how to dress yourself well while also listening to a delightful conversation, this is a good podcast to try. Y'all know that I'm always looking for a conversational podcast that'll help me keep my sanity intact when I'm home all day with my kids. And this podcast definitely fits the bill. If you're not sure where to start with the show, I recommend listening to episode 44, How to Tell If Clothing Fits Well. This episode walks you through what to look for when shopping to guarantee you're buying the right size. I'll put a link to this episode in the show notes. The last style podcast on today's list is called Nothing to Wear. The host, Samantha Harmon, is a style coach who helps women, especially leaders and entrepreneurs, be confident in their style and use that confidence to level up their business and their life. On top of all that goodness, Samantha has an awesome accent that is super fun to listen to, and her approach to style and life is refreshingly straightforward. She does use strong language sometimes, so keep that in mind if that's something you're worried about. A great episode to start with is the episode called What I Have Nothing to Wear Really Means. She dives into why you really feel like you have nothing to wear, and it's a great introduction to her and her show. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. If you've gotten into a bit of a clothing rut this summer, like me, then I hope you'll try out some of these podcasts to help you feel confident in your style and what you're wearing as we start to escape the summer heat. Talk to you soon.